Can Scotland's new First Minister unite his party? Is Margaret Thatcher's right-to-buy policy fuelling the housing crisis? And are AI chatbots politically biased? This is Politics Live. Joining me today, Conservative MP Bob Seely, Preet Gill from Labour's Shadow Cabinet, Carla Denyer, co-leader of the Green Party, and Emma Revel from the Centre for Policy Studies. Today, the Scottish Parliament will elect Humza Yousaf as the new First Minister.
We are no longer Team Humza or Team Ash or Team Kate. We are one team, and we will be the team. We will be the generation that delivers independence for Scotland.
But can he unite a divided party?
We are now united, and we unite behind Humza.
And still a space for you?
Well, I would hope so.
So this was your place, and now it's, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places.
Gee whiz.
Has Margaret Thatcher's flagship right-to-buy policy contributed to our current housing crisis? And is Elon Musk right that AI chatbots are politically biased? Let's start with something completely different and have a look at this headline in today's Mail. Fury as households could be forced to pay to have 7 different waste bins. Amid fears councils may push cost of government green scheme onto taxpayers. Now, this follows on from a government consultation on the issue of recycling. The government wants to encourage more of it and try to address some of the disparities across authorities in England. Let me start off by asking you, how many bins do you have currently?
I was thinking about this on the way here. I have a green bin, I have a black bin, I have a cardboard bin, don't always use.
That's 3.
And I have a caddy. But the secret of having fewer bins, which, and I'm going to give a shout out to the Isle of Wight, because our council has one of the most efficient recycling schemes in Europe. We recycle 98%, is that you recycle the stuff that's in the green bin and you recycle the stuff that's in the black bin, and then you are allowed to incinerate what comes out of both, because then you produce, on the island, we produce electricity for 6,000 homes, and from this summer, hopefully, we'll start to produce the byproduct, the steam byproduct, is going to heat the hospital.
Well, very efficiently outlined. So you've got 4 bins?
I have got 4 bins.
Would you like any more?
No, I'm very happy with just 4, and I think the simpler you make it, the better, but you need to be able to recycle the black bin and the green bin, and that's why the Isle of Wight does it so brilliantly.
Preet, do you think people need more bins? How many have you got?
Well, I've got 4, but imagine if you live in a rural area, you could probably have 7 bins. But of course, if you live in a terrace house in the city, where on earth are you going to put all the bins? And you've got to really look at cost versus impact. So councils are saying this is going to cost a lot of money. It's about actually changing behaviours. Is it really going to make the impact that it's going to have? I mean, local authorities have a huge amount of cuts, and actually Labour-run Wales has done really well in the last 10 years. They've seen an increase of people from 4.8% to over 65%. So some of this is about shifting behaviour, but actually, does it make the difference? Because it's less than 15% that household waste actually contributes in terms of, you know, net zero. And so actually, should we be doing more around plastics? That's certainly what Labour would do.
I mean, if you want to encourage people to recycle more and do it more effectively, Carla, what's your situation in Bristol?
Well, I think we are all agreed that we need to recycle more of valuable materials and stop just tipping them into the ground or burning them.
Have you got, how many bins have you got?
I and most people in Bristol have 5 or 6, depending on whether they have a garden waste bin or not. And yeah, if you've got a spacious front garden, that's fine. But if you're in flats, it's not. And in fact, many people in flats don't have the full recycling range at the moment. I think that we could learn a lot from Wales, actually. Many Welsh councils have really good recycling rates, and they do have lots of different sections, but rather than having 7 completely different bins blowing around in the street, they'll have one unit that has several compartments. And so I think this is slightly scaremongering, talking about 7 bins. I think the ideal solution, the common sense solution, is to, yes, have compartmentalisation, but to have it in a neat and tidy way. And I think there are several Welsh councils that are showing us the way on that.
You're nodding there in agreement. How many bins do you have?
I've got 4 big wheelie bins and a small food caddy.
4 big wheelie bins.
Yeah, I mean, I live in a 6-person shared house, so luckily, we've got a very small front garden, which is almost entirely bins. That's what it's for, effectively. Yeah. But my neighbouring properties, who are split into 2 flats, for example, they have got twice as many bins because it's 2 properties, but they haven't got the space for twice as many bins, never mind if we started adding additional. And if you go around the corner, they don't have front gardens for those terraced houses. The street is full. You couldn't get a wheelchair, you couldn't get a buggy past them. It's just full of bins. So I think we need to consider not only the cost for councils and households, but the practicalities of where they would go.
Do you agree with that? Oh, sorry, go on, Carla.
I was going to say, recycling is important, but what's even better than recycling is not producing that waste in the first place. So, of course, there's work being done in the Scottish Government at the moment about a deposit return scheme which will stop things getting into the waste stream in the first place.
Yes, although I think that's run into a certain number of problems.
Sadly, incredibly unsuccessful policy. So it'd be nice if they actually...
Well, it's being blocked by the Conservative Government.
But
I think that's a little bit different to...
Well, you were muttering it's easier said than done. Why is that in general as a principle?
The more bins you have, the more frustrated people are going to get because they've got lives to lead. So the simpler you make the scheme, the better. But for that, you need to be doing 2 things. You need to recycle the black bin stuff if you've got the capacity, and that means investment in plant, and you need to be able to incinerate safely so you don't pollute the world, but you turn that incinerated material into electricity and byproducts as well.
But you're making the public actually pay for initiative that you actually should be supporting the public to actually recycle, change their behaviours, because councils have faced huge amounts of cuts and people are going to have to pay for recycling.
I don't understand the argument. We have a very competitive...
Well, people are going to have to pay for their bins. They're having to start to pay for the green bins now because of the cuts to local
You are paying for garden waste bins in a lot of areas.
I mean, yes, you're making people pay for the very thing that the government needs to show leadership on.
Well, Labour councils...
Labour Wales is showing the leadership.
I'm sorry, OK, when it comes to recycling, let's have some facts here. The worst recyclers in Britain is the Green Council in Brighton. The best recycling across Britain is done by Conservatives who are way ahead of Labour councils when it comes to recycling.
All right, well, you've made quite a charge. Go on, then. What's your view of it?
Well, no, I'm going to disagree with that because, as we've just heard, Labour in Wales has just shown that if you invest and if you do it properly and you take the public with you, over 65% of people are recycling. We've got so much more to do on this, and the government can't just make people pay. Either local authorities,
100% of people on the Isle of Wight are recycling.
Well, what's the population of Isle of Wight?
140,000, but we're all recycling.
Right. What about Brighton?
Well, I think that often how well the recycling works is a function of what kind of housing you have. Brighton and Hove is a very built-up city where there's lots of buildings split into flats that don't have the space, and that's why a simple, separated but easy to use system that works just as well for blocks of flats as it does for large country houses in councils typically run by the Conservatives. It needs to work for all possible types of housing.
And let's leave it there. Yesterday, the new leader of the SNP was announced, Humza Yousaf. He's going to be confirmed by MSPs as Scotland's new First Minister in the next hour or so. Let's take a look at a couple of the front pages. The Daily Record has historic day for Scotland, Humza the First. And let's have a look at the National. History made as Yousaf wins. New SNP leader is on course to become the first Muslim First Minister. And the Scotsman, referring to problems ahead, potentially Yousaf faces uphill battle to unite a divided party. Well, let's put that question to Stuart Hosey, the SNP MP. He joins us now. Hello to you, Stuart. It's not going to be easy, is it? It was an acrimonious campaign. I watched those debates as the candidates took lumps out of each other. How can Humza Yousaf really bring the SNP back together after all the cracks that contest exposed?
Well, I'm not sure I actually did show that many cracks. I mean, Humza's only the 5th person to lead the SNP in 40 years. This is the first contested leadership we've had in 20 years. I'm not surprised some of the things said were a little spicy, of course they were. But I thought the answers or the comments by Ash Regan and Kate Forbes afterwards were extremely helpful. And I've got absolutely no doubt my soundings from the party at large is that the party will come together and come together extremely quickly.
Well, you mentioned Kate Forbes and Ash Regan. Of course, together they received over half the votes. Is Kate Forbes, and should she be offered a job in Humza Yousaf's cabinet?
I suspect that Humza will offer both Kate and Ash a role in government. I'm pretty confident about that.
A role in government, but I'm talking about actually in his top team.
Well, the decisions as to who is asked to take which role is a matter entirely for the First Minister.
But I'm asking your opinion.
I think he will almost certainly offer them a role in government. That's my opinion. I think that's exactly what he'll do.
Right. I mean, have you had any discussions at all with Humza Yousaf about what he may or may not do?
I haven't spoken to him since he was elected. I spoke to him during the campaign a couple of times, some bits of insight here and there, but I suspect he will be an extremely good leader, if for no other reason than he's inordinately personable. He's very empathetic, and I think he'll bring people with him.
Right, but why would Kate Forbes want a position in Humza Yousaf's cabinet? She trashed his record, as you know. She said when he was Transport Minister, the trains were never on time. When he was Justice Minister, the police were strained to breaking point. And as Health Minister, we've got, she said, record high waiting times. Why would she want to take a job?
Well, I think she'd want to take a job because she believes in Scottish independence. She believes the SNP are the vehicle to deliver that, and by and large she believes and agrees with the positions of the party. And in terms of the critiques that were made, as I say, things are said during election campaigns.
What, you think she didn't believe those things?
I think the actuality is that Scotland has got the best core waiting times in the whole of the UK. The trains do run on time, and the strikes in Scotland were resolved and resolved rather quickly.
Well, she was wrong. I mean, I have to...
No, Joe, this is really important. I mean, you're making these assertions and...
I'm not making any assertions. Come on, this is what she said in the contest. Those are her words.
When it comes to things like justice, we've got the lowest crime rate since 1974. Meanwhile, in England, barely 5% of crimes reported even end up with somebody charged. Now, am I saying things are perfect? No, of course they're not perfect. Governments are there to fix problems, and these problems will be addressed and they'll be resolved. But I think if our political opponents think one or two things said in anger during a leadership contest is a big win for them in an election in 2 or 3 or 4 years' time, I suspect they don't quite have what they think they have.
Well, let's just have a look at the figures today, just after the contest has finished. Maybe she has got a point, Kate Forbes. Let's show... I know you can't see it, but I'll read you the headline, Stuart Hosey in the Herald. A&E waits worsen again on Yousaf's last day as Health Secretary. Very clearly behind both NHS England and Wales when it comes to A&E waiting times, with just 62.9% of patients seen on time, compared to, as I say, both England and Wales. Scotland is the worst. She's got a point, hasn't she, Kate Forbes, in terms of his record?
Every single NHS in the UK has struggled, particularly over the last 3 years, for reasons which we know. For the last umpteen months, the Scottish position had been much better and was getting better. Things do happen in health services. We see that across the UK. No, I don't think she does have a point. I think these are simply challenges which must be addressed and which will be addressed.
Well, no, she does have a point because it's backed up by the figures. Since last June, Scotland is performing less well than both England and Wales, and that's according to the official Public Health Scotland, NHS England and figures in Wales since last June when Humza Yousaf was Health Minister.
Well, I've not seen those figures. You said they've come out today. I will happily look at them. But as I say, waiting times had been improving. The waiting times on many other metrics in the NHS in Scotland were the best of all the NHSs in the UK. It's not without its challenges, but those challenges are there to be addressed, and they will be addressed.
Yeah, maybe Kate Forbes can have the role of Health Minister in Humza Yousaf's government. When it comes to the issue of independence, the core of the being of the SNP, what is going to be Humza Yousaf's first step? Is it going to be putting in another request for a referendum, another independence referendum to Westminster, which they've already said they'll decline?
Well, he seems to have said he's going to make the request a Section 30 transfer for the powers to hold the referendum. I think that's a sensible thing to do, not least because the Scottish Government, the SNP, has a mandate to hold a referendum. But more importantly than that, he said during the campaign he intends to bring the party together and the wider Yes movement, so we could consider in detail, with all the nuances that you can't do on television, all of the various routes by which we might get to independence. And I think the conclusion of that will be very instructive about how we campaign, whether we simply go for a referendum, whether we run an election as a de facto referendum, or perhaps whether there's some other route. I think the conclusion of that, hopefully in short order, will determine exactly the route to independence that Scotland will take.
Right. I mean, just before I come back to you on that, Bob, on the Section 30, on asking, again, Westminster for an independence referendum on the electoral wins and strength of the SNP, do you think Westminster should reconsider?
No, I don't. It was pretty clear during the election or the referendum campaign, and Nicola Sturgeon said herself that it was a once-in-a-lifetime vote. That was it, according to the SNP's leadership. And I just wish not only the SNP, but actually the media base in Westminster, if you look at the Scottish people, what they actually want, all the polling suggests that independence comes 7th, after a whole bunch of things, crime and health and all the stuff that Humza Yousaf has done really badly and all the stuff that the SNP has failed miserably on. So again, we're obsessing about something that doesn't obsess the Scottish people, only the SNP.
Stuart?
And I wish the SNP would get back to actually trying to govern a lot better than they have.
Well, you would say that because you're a unionist, but Stuart, what's your response?
Well, my response is that the SNP have won the last elections, 8 elections in a row in Scotland. We've won mandate after mandate. The opinion polls do bobble about round the 50% for and against independence. I think Bob Seeley is absolutely wrong. You know, I think if someone, whether they're unionist or not, was to actually respect the fact that Scotland's a nation, that nations have the right to become independent, they've got the right to self-determine, have the confidence of their own position.
I absolutely respect it. I absolutely respect it, but you had a once-in-a-generation and a once-in-a-lifetime vote. So stop trying to have a vote every other week until you win it.
Oh, Bob, please. We're not having a vote every other week.
You're
after
trying
2014,
You're trying to have vote after vote until you win it. The fact is, you had a once-in-a-lifetime vote, you lost it, move on, and actually try to govern.
Well, let him answer.
We respected the result, Bob, which is why the Scottish National Party are still here at Westminster in considerable numbers compared to all of the unionist parties combined. But democracy doesn't stand still. We keep winning elections, we keep winning mandates, and I think instead of lecturing me, Bob,
no,
it would
I'm
be
not
better,
lecturing, I'm just pointing out that you had a once-in-a-lifetime vote and you lost it.
Tories in particular, to respect that when the Scottish people change their mind, unionism should change its mind as well.
All right, let me ask Preet. Well, hang on, let me ask Preet, because what Stuart Hosey says is true. It's been broadly split, yes and no, at 50-50. That means you've made no headway, really, at all in persuading people to come and support the Labour Party in Scotland, either at Holyrood elections or at general elections.
I don't buy that. I mean, look, Humza Yousaf is unpopular with voters. He's got a divided party. He's got some huge challenges. He's been a failure in all the ministerial roles.
So you're relying on his demise rather than what you have to offer?
The problem with the SNP at the moment is they don't actually have a plan for people in Scotland. People in Scotland care about the cost of living crisis. They want a government that's on their side, that has a plan. It's Labour that will help people save £1,400 every single year with our plan in terms of investing in the Green Prosperity Plan. This is the kind of leadership, actually, that people in Scotland want and deserve.
Stuart, I'll come back to you in just a moment. Carla.
Well, Bob's been avoiding the fact that there is a majority in favour of independence in Holyrood, with the SNP and the Greens working together. And actually, that government has already been tackling the cost of living crisis in Scotland. They've brought in a suite of fantastic policies, including free bus travel for all young people, a massive investment in making homes more energy efficient, getting off coal, getting off fracking, you know, environmental policies, social policies, really looking out for the people of Scotland.
Shutting down oil and gas. We need gas for another 10, 20 years. You're shutting down supply in this country. You're trying to. This is a disaster. It's economically a disaster. It's a disaster for jobs and a disaster for energy security. Come on.
Actually, they've been doing a lot of work on what's called a just transition. So that's helping workers in the oil and gas sector to move to greener industries. Poll after poll shows that... I'll just finish if it's OK. Poll after poll shows that workers in those industries families often really want to work in renewable energy, but they need the route to get there, whether that's skills passports or other mechanisms. There are people that work in oil and gas that know it's not the future. They want to get out, and the Scottish Greens are helping with that.
Look at drug tests.
All right,
the NHS waiting list. I mean, these are big issues.
Well, let Stuart come back. Stuart, do you want to respond to that?
I'll just respond to one piece because there's a huge amount of things being said, but Preet said the SNP were divided. Unfortunately, the SNP are actually rather united now we've got this election, leadership election done. I think the real issue the Labour Party have, apart from looking very much like Tories, is they're stopping Jeremy Corbyn standing much against the wishes of many of their members. And of course, they've lost 100,000 or so members in recent times. I think if any party is split and divided and there's nothing to offer the Scottish people, sadly, it's the Labour Party.
Disagree.
Can I just put to you, Carla, your party, the Greens, are in a governing coalition with the SNP, your sister party certainly in Scotland, and very keen on the gender recognition reform bill, which actually caused an awful lot of problems for Nicola Sturgeon. Are you optimistic that Humza Yousaf is going to try and recommit to that bill and that piece of legislation?
Yes, I am optimistic, and reform to the gender recognition laws was part of the Butte House agreement between the SNP and the Green Party, so I know that the Scottish Greens are very keen to see that go forward. There's a lot of misinformation that circulates about gender recognition reform, about suggesting that it's to do with accessing certain spaces. What it's about is making sure that trans people have dignity. It's about making sure that their marriage certificates and their death certificates accurately record their gender, something that the rest of us take for granted. And it's quite a small change, really, but it could have a really big benefit for the people who are affected.
Stuart, will that be a commitment?
I think he's already made that commitment. Remember, the GRR bill is the most consulted on and longest time to deliver bill in the whole of the Scottish Parliament. It's done perfectly legally. And the issue here is now not about the substance of gender recognition. It's about the anti-democratic actions of the UK government trying to stop a properly passed piece of Scottish legislation.
Stuart Hosey, thank you very much for joining us. I have some important breaking news for you, and that is that MI5 has raised the threat in Northern Ireland, and that is in relation to Northern Ireland-related terrorism, and it's raised from severe, too severe, I should say, from substantial. So, the threat in Northern Ireland has been raised too severe from substantial. The Northern Ireland Secretary, Chris Heaton-Harris, announced the move in a written statement to the Commons, and you can see more reaction to that on BBC News Channel. Just before we go on, a quick word on the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. Should the government in Westminster withdraw their block?
No, we should have overruled it, and Rishi did exactly the right thing. Putting male rapists in female prisons and calling it justice is absurd.
This is a deeply divisive issue. You've got to take the British public with you. To ignore them, you ignore them at your peril. That's exactly what Humza Yousaf is doing. He's creating a dividing issue on something where we already have strong legislation to protect the very people that you were talking about.
All right, let's talk about housing, because we're going to show you an excerpt from last night's Panorama investigation into what's happening with ex-council housing in England. That was after Margaret Thatcher's flagship right-to-buy policy in the 1980s. Avril bought her council home in Lewisham in 1984 for £15,000 and sold it for £85,000 4 years later. It's now in the hands of a private landlord. She went back with BBC reporter Richard Bilton to see what it's like now.
Your old kitchen is this gentleman's home, and he pays 960 quid a month for it.
I think it's disgusting, absolutely disgusting.
What was once a family home is now 6 bedsits and a lucrative business. It's estimated that 40% of the council homes sold in London are now owned by private landlords.
I feel very sad it's ended up like this, because this is horrible.
Has this shown that the right-to-buy policy has been a failure in the long term?
No, I don't think it has. I watched the Panorama show yesterday. I thought it was very interesting and it highlighted a lot of problems with the housing crisis, but they were the problems that were highlighted. Housing, not just social housing, not just right to buy. There were examples in the rest of the show on damage in council-owned properties, ones that were still owned by other housing associations and ones that were bought and sold under right to buy. The issue is, fundamentally, we don't build enough homes in this country, full stop, and that causes problems in every different type of property, whether you're renting from a private landlord, a social landlord or a housing association.
Bob?
It's a very complex issue. When you're asking me, was right to buy a mistake? No, it was absolutely a great policy and a very, very popular one. It was 40 years ago, and an awful lot has happened since then. So to say after 13 years of a new Labour government, 12 years of a Tory coalition government, that you can blame problems on stuff 40 years ago, I don't really buy. We absolutely need, and I'm very supportive of, in my patch on the Isle of Wight, I want the council to be building council housing. I want affordable housing. I want us housing associations to build genuinely affordable
but they
housing
haven't
for
done.
young people. Well, hold on, but we're putting 11.5. The government is committing 11.5 billion to help affordable housing. So we have a massive affordable housing scheme. Can I just answer the point about, you made a very important point about household formations are not building enough. If you look at household formations, it averages about 130,000 a year. So there's 130,000 new household formations every year, so new households. We are, even in bad years, we are building something like 180 to 200,000.
But
and over that period, so in our 12 years compared to Labour, we built more affordable housing.
Well, you can trace statistics generally, but there hasn't been enough housing.
Household formation is a really poor statistic to use, because I live with 5 housemates. We are one household. We don't want to be one household. I love my housemates dearly. We get on very well. But in an ideal situation, we wouldn't live together. We would live in our own properties. Those households formation is being held back by the lack of properties.
But is there a problem with right to buy, first of all? Was there a problem at the time? You still support it, but when you look at the problems, and you say it's 40 years, yes, it is, it's a long time ago, but did it lay the ground for council homes then being sold into the private market for vastly inflated prices, which was their right to do, reduce that council housing stock to such a level that it's actually priced out a whole younger generation of people from being able to do exactly as Emma would like to, perhaps not share a house with 5 people?
I mean, look, Labour supports the principle of everybody owning their own home, and certainly something we want to do, because you've got 1.1 million people on waiting lists. I mean, this is hugely catastrophic. It's because the government has failed to build more homes. The thing is, if people buy, you've got to replace what you're selling with stock. And, of course, our stock is really old, but we have got no ambition from this government. It doesn't actually have a plan in terms of saying we need to build X amount of homes, but also what about homes for older people? So thinking about how do we unlock bigger properties? What kind of homes do we actually need that are fit for the future? And the thing is, you know, it is not right that people, you know, first-time buyers don't actually have access to the market. They're outpriced. This is something Labour will absolutely address.
I completely agree, and I'll give you an example, okay, because I know my patch, I know the housing market there. For 50 years, we have not built for young people on the island, regardless of what government and, frankly, what the colour of the council was. And so what we need to do, and one of the things I did during the planning... Let me just make a point. One of the things, I don't know, one of the things that I did during the planning... One of the things that I did during the planning rebellion was to make sure that my council on the Isle of Wight, let me finish the point, has the power to say we are pretty much going to go hell for leather and build and focus overwhelmingly on building affordable homes for young islanders.
But you campaigned against mandatory housing targets.
Yes, because you need to have the variability. And the one thing that many of us are against is this reliance, and it's a very unenvironmentally friendly reliance, on greenfield, low-density, poor quality, anti-climate change, car-dependent housing estates outside town centres.
All right, well, let them respond.
But Bob, do you know what your government is doing? It's saying to developers that they no longer have to pay the Section 106 payment, which is more schools, more housing, social housing.
We're spending 11 billion on affordable
Bob, let her answer.
My goodness, I mean, how can you say that? The 106 payments for developers is about providing local resources, having social housing properties, having schools. You're scrapping all of that. So not only are you not building, but you're now actually letting developers get away with it.
Sorry,
it's just
that is untrue.
Bob's rant about low-density greenfield development with no amenities was truly bizarre, because those developments happen because of lax regulation, because of the Conservative government. We hear in rural areas where Greens are getting lots of councillors elected in places like Suffolk and Herefordshire, the frustration with massive 4, 5, 6-bedroom homes with double garages, but with no schools, no doctors' surgeries, no way of getting anywhere without reliance on a car. That's all happening because of Conservative national government policy.
We want to change that policy. So we're trying to change that because I think having car-dependent, out-of-town, greenfield building sites, which are unconnected to communities, are bad for people. They're bad for my young people. It's not a rant. It's actually something I'm really passionate about.
Well, hang on,
because
Emma.
I want to get people living in communities near public services and actually to help first-time buyers. And indeed,
But hang on,
last-time
Bob.
sellers.
The conclusion, Emma, is that just not enough houses are being built, isn't it?
Yes, for a variety of different reasons, most of which are related to how incredibly difficult it is to get planning permission. But also, you know, all due respect to Bob, politicians like Bob who object to various different types of planning in their area, they go, the amenities aren't there, we need to build the amenities as well. Of course we do. But the idea that people... It doesn't matter, really, how beautiful you try and make it. There was always someone who's going to say, not here, this isn't the right place, we need to build on brownfield. We don't have enough brownfield as a country. A lot of brownfield is not suitable for housing because it used to be a petrol station or a factory, and the cost of cleaning it up would be, you know, would push up the price of housing. We need to build more
Let me let
houses.
Carla in first, and then I'll come back to you.
Refocusing on the question raised by that Panorama episode, I think it makes the point very clearly that Green politicians and much of the public have known for a long time, which is that right to buy is a slum landlord's charter. A significant proportion of former council homes in London, as the documentary showed, are now private rented and often in very poor quality. And that's why the Greens think that right to buy has to go. It's one of the many problems with right to buy is that it reduces the amount of social housing in this country.
We have the fourth highest housing stock in Europe.
And it's much lower than it used to be. And partly that's because councils do not receive enough funding to either build new or buy new council houses to make up for the ones that are sold off.
And when they do manage, they're objected to.
It is reducing social housing by stealth by the Conservatives, and I'm actually quite disappointed to hear that Labour support it as well.
Right, and why do you support it?
No, we support because the principle of people being able to own their own property is absolutely the right one. I mean, but the thing what we're seeing is that properties are now being turned into bedsits and flats, you know, mould, damp, the conditions that people are living in are absolutely awful. HMOs are being set up where vulnerable people are being placed without any support. The government's failing to bring any regulation. It talks the talk all of the time, but it's happy for people to be put into substandard accommodation. Well, I think it's OK.
You were singing the praises of the Labour government in Wales, where actually they've decided to scrap right to buy. Well, they did it in 2019. Was that a mistake?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's about the money that they get from central government in terms of being able to afford to buy new properties, you know, to build more new properties and have more housing and replace its old stock. And of course, this all comes back down to funding. If you strip councils away from funding, you really, you know, you're not going to get the house built that you expect. And now you're impacting the social housing association sector because now you're extending right to buy within that.
OK, well, you seem a bit confused about whether you support right to buy.
No, I support the right to buy. I've made it very clear. The principle is absolutely right.
Would you support it being extended, which is what Boris Johnson had recently suggested when he was Prime Minister? It hasn't happened, and that was 2 housing associations.
I would actually, but let me hold on. But I will be more specific about that. Firstly, when it comes to investment in affordable and social housing, the government's committing £11.5 billion for a massive expansion of it because we understand we need to get building. It's a question of building in the right places where young people want to live, which is not some out-of-town housing estate. When it comes to right to buy, I support it. In my patch, I want flexibility for councils and local communities to make their own minds. What I want actually is rent to buy because we have a limited housing stock on the island. We need to get young people into their first homes. We then need to support them as they build up a deposit because it's the deposit that's very often the critical bit. And when they build up a deposit, they can go out into the free market and buy a house. But it's getting that young people to be able to.
If I go back to the excerpt there in the film, one of the tenants in that house divided into 6 bedsits was paying £960 a month to the private landlord.
So we need to get building, and that's why
building, or should there be rent controls?
No, sorry, OK. Everywhere there are rent controls, it sounds nice, and it's a great line for a politician to say, more power to the state, let's have rent controls. If you look at the facts on rent controls in New York, in San Francisco, in Germany and Sweden, you have less investment in housing. So if you think you've got bad housing now, if we had rent controls, it would be much worse.
Carla?
So actually, you need a vibrant private sector, and it's about making sure you get investment into that sector so that people have a choice.
Carla?
There is a place for private renting if it's a choice. But the trouble is that there's a generation of people who cannot afford to buy ever. They are trapped in private renting, paying off somebody else's mortgage rather than their own, with no prospect of ever being able to buy because the rents are spiralling and bear no relationship to incomes anymore, especially in cities like my home city of Bristol, where rent is a real issue and where I seconded a motion to Bristol City Council earlier this year in support of rent controls. Now, currently, councils don't have the power to bring in rent controls, but this motion was about lobbying government for the power and doing the legwork locally now on how it could work. And I'll just finish. There are many different ways to skin a cat. There's lots of different ways to do rent controls, and there's a lot to be learnt from ones that have worked well, ones that have worked slightly less well.
The worry is...
It can be tailored. It can be tailored to the local situation, and that's why, rather than doing it nationally everywhere, we want to give councils the power to bring that in where it's needed.
Emma?
Rent controls do not address the underlying problem that we do not have enough housing. If you live in a property that becomes rent controlled, fantastic. You know, you've saved money, the worry of it increasing is gone. If you need to leave that property, then you have a problem. It only works if you are in a property that is suited to your needs. If your family breaks up, or you want to have children, or you want to move into with someone, you have to move out of that rent control property. The properties that are not rent controlled, massively more expensive. You have examples, international examples of, you know, the wait for a rent control property in Stockholm is 11 years. You think social housing has a long waiting list. Rent control properties are even worse. The problem is we do not have enough homes. We need to build.
On that, I'm going to move you on to this headline in the Mail on Sunday. It says, Google AI accused of left-wing bias. Tory MPs fear revolutionary search tool will dent their election hopes. Now, this relates to artificial intelligence chatbots, software used to conduct an online chat conversation. The newspaper says that the Google Bard chatbot condemned Brexit as a bad idea, described Jeremy Corbyn as having the potential to be a great leader. That came after reports that Twitter owner Elon Musk thinks artificial intelligence chatbots are too woke. Are they biased?
Well, look, some of the evidence suggests that they are, and some of the academic, more importantly, some of the academic research shows that AI is either getting programmed people with left-wing opinions, or maybe they just look at different bits of the internet that give them the answers of a left-of-centre kind. More generally, I am worried about freedom of speech in the 21st century, whether it comes from the Communist Party in China shutting down freedom of speech absolutely in their country and oppressing their minority populations, or whether it comes from big search engines and the social media companies kiboshing debate on COVID. And I'm not talking about conspiracy theories. I'm talking about stuff like where the origins of the virus came from. And now there is potential evidence that it might have come from a laboratory. It's not a crazy fringe idea, and yet that sort of debate was shut down. So I do think there is a problem about freedom of speech and making sure that we have freedom of speech for everybody within reason.
Are they political bias?
I think they're definitely biased, but we've got to be clear, what are they actually for? And this is where the government has really been absent in terms of really holding the social media companies to account. The online social harms bill is coming through. I'm worried about disinformation, how it's going to be used to spread disinformation. We already see on social media, on Twitter, how bots are turned on and off by many countries that want to influence and attack us. So what is it actually for? So if you're reporting a crime to the police and you've got somebody, you know, saying, here's your reference number, thank you very much, and you've responded, absolutely fine. But you know, and also, let's not forget, in certain countries there's legislation. So why are the bots not actually sharing information that's actually accurate and reflective in terms of that country and what it actually means, rather than sharing their concerns and their woke issues on some of these issues as reported? Let's talk to Zoe Kleiman, the BBC's technology editor. Why might AI chatbots show political bias, Zoe?
Well, I think it's really interesting to look at this. You know, we know that AI and bias is a thing. We absolutely are aware of that. The reason is that it gets its information from the internet. The internet itself, as we know, is full of misinformation and also full of bias. So, you know, in the case of, for example, I think the Mail on Sunday took the example of Brexit, and it asked ChatGPT whether Brexit was bad, and it said that ChatGPT replied that it was. Now, you have to bear in mind that people tend to complain about things more than praise them. It's quite possible that people who are upset about the Brexit vote are more likely to be more vocal about it on the internet, and therefore there might be more negative stuff about Brexit on the internet than there is positive stuff. And that's where ChatGPT is getting its knowledge from. However, you know, it is absolutely up to the companies ultimately that create these chatbots to make sure that they are not being biased, and that they are able to understand that what the information that they have isn't necessarily the information that is correct. I asked it myself, by the way, and I couldn't get it to give me an opinion. It gave me a list of pros and cons given both sides.
Right, so it could be down to the sort of programming of these things, and also whether if you change that, you might get a more nuanced answer.
I think that we need to look at exactly what AI is trained on. It's trained on massive data sets, enormous amounts of information. There have been examples over the years. So, for example, it used to be that, algorithms that were programmed to recognise hands were given thousands, millions of pictures of hands. But because most pictures on the internet are white, they were all white hands, so they didn't recognise black hands. That was something that was picked up very early on as an issue that needed to be addressed. What you put in, ultimately, is what you get out.
Right. What could they be used for in the future then?
So there's a report that's out today which is suggesting that chatbots like ChatGPT could threaten, I think, 300 million jobs. And I think we really do need to think seriously about this because they are so human-like in the way that they respond. They can write, they can mimic copy, they give you information in a way that's very easy to understand. They don't yet speak. I think when they speak, you and I might be thinking about alternative employment as well. We are really in the infancy of these things. Bear in mind, this is only version 4 of GPT that's out now, and already it can do all of these things. And I think, we are at a real fork in the road in terms of where we're going to go with it and what jobs are going to be affected. The people that make them argue that it frees you up to do other things. Do you want to spend 4 hours writing a PowerPoint presentation when ChatGPT can do it for you in 2.5 seconds? But the question is, will there be anything left for you to do that these bots aren't doing already?
Emma?
Well, I think it's really interesting because these programs do what they're programmed to do. So, humans are biased, we have biases naturally, and, we therefore put them into the programs that we create. I think from what I understand, the Microsoft one is will give you an opinion if you ask it to, but the ChatGPT, sorry, I've got this the wrong way around, but the ChatGPT won't. It gives you a very neutral sort of pros and cons. Even if you push it, it won't give you an opinion. So, it's something to be concerned about and I think aware of going forward, but I don't think we should panic just yet.
Well, as Zoe said, this is a well-known phenomenon in AI, but actually in technology generally. There was a case a few years ago where automatic soap dispensers were not detecting the hands of people of colour because it wasn't reflecting the amount of light they'd been programmed to expect. That's a real-world example of where the biases of people writing the software that operates the soap dispenser in that case, or in the case of AI, it's simply the text that it scrapes off the internet to learn from. Humans are biased. Unfortunately, we can do what we can to tackle that, but we are, and therefore the software learns from us and carries that bias through.
Was this bias, Bob? This made us laugh. Your local newspaper, Meta's new AI chatbot,
blog.
thinks Bob Seeley isn't very nice.
It's an alt-left blog, and I'm in reality...
It could have said worse. It could have said a lot worse.
In reality, I'm super cuddly. So, but look, if nothing else, if chatboxers think that Jeremy Corbyn is going to be a great leader, they've obviously got a sense of humour. What can I say?
Oh, Preet, is this something to be embraced? I mean, not that Bob Seeley isn't very nice, but in general, or do we need to change the people who are writing these programmes?
I think, look, it's a really exciting opportunity in terms of technological advancement, jobs for the future, but I think we have to be careful in terms of the biases that those creating them are able to install in them. So should they be focused on fact, regulation? I think it's really important, the Online Social Harms Bill, we all want to hold the government to account. It can say, oh, we're worried and it's, leading towards this side or the other, but actually, what are you going to do about it? I mean, that's going to be the crux of it.
Well, Michelle Donnellan has said trust the bots. She's the new Science Secretary of State. Should we?
No. I disagree. I'm afraid I disagree with what she says on that.
Oh, right. So you don't think that we should embrace it. Why not?
Well, let's embrace it. But the idea that you trust AI, I know you've always got to be questioning this stuff and you've always got to be making sure that we can continue to live in a human-centric world where we value human life and bots are there to support human life in the long term, and artificial intelligence is there for human freedom. 21st century, look, the bigger picture when it comes to geopolitics.
Is it inevitable?
21st century, there is going to be a battle between two visions of humanity. There is going to be authoritarian states who are going to be using AI and big data to oppress people, and there's going to be our open societies, and we have to use AI and big data to enhance human life.
Preet?
Well, absolutely. I think, it's the point that I made earlier. Yes, of course, it's exciting and, this is an opportunity to think about ways that we can use it positively, create good jobs. We're quite way behind on that, but it's going to need regulation. It's going to need very stringent regulation.
So that's what a Labour government would do.
Absolutely. We've got to be clear. What is it going to be used for? As you say, geopolitical actors, disinformation. These are the kind of threats and risks that we've got to be... Well,
that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. You'll have to hold it for another day. But thank you to all of my guests for joining me today. I'll be back tomorrow, of course, on PM Tuesday at 11:50. From all of us here, bye-bye.